I've been on a few happy conferences, and I always go away with new ideas, and I've got several jotted down on this piece of paper. My staff will be loving it. But there's one I picked up from the last conference, and it was one of yours, Dom, and you mentioned it again today, and it's the triangulation idea. And it's when one of your colleagues comes to you and tells you, perhaps in a one-to-one, I'm sick of X. X is no good. X is a laggard. X is not doing his job. And I've told him so many times, and I'm just fed up. So I said, if you don't tell him that within 48 hours, I'm going to tell him myself. And the look on my colleague's face, I still can see it now. Because the mistake I made was not telling him I was going to do this. I think you have to learn how to apply these new ideas in a way that will work for staff. But anyway, it was an interesting time, an interesting moment. Okay, Epic CIC. We are a public sector mutual. Andrew mentioned the mutual model earlier. What we are, we're employee-led. We are, our staff have seats on our board of directors. 5 of our staff are elected by their colleagues to be on the board of directors. We have what we call a staff council, where a group of staff can come together once a month to meet with me, and they bring questions from all over the organisation. Sometimes they can be anonymous. And interestingly, when we first started this, staff wanted to be anonymous all the time, but more recently, staff have felt more courage to actually put their names to some of the questions. And one of the rules, in fact, the only rule, is I've got to answer all of the questions. And we're moving now from being just employee-led to becoming employee-owned. And we have actually now issued a share issue to staff, and staff are buying in to the organisation. So what is this all about? Well, only 2 years ago, we were part of this council. We were part of Kensington and Chelsea and running a youth support and development service. And this is just a brief overview of who we are. And we have a multitude of different sites that we operate from. We provide youth support services to young people from all over Kensington and Chelsea and beyond. About 4,000 young people or so attend our services every year. Quite a broad spectrum of young people, from those who just need a little bit of support to those who, without support, will end up in our prisons, in our mental health institutions, in long-term care, ill, or possibly even dead. And I'm not being melodramatic when I say that. So, and all points in between. And we ran that service in the council, very well regarded by the council and very well funded, I have to say. But round about 2011, not more than 10 metres from where I'm standing now, I was invited in by the chief executive of the council and the lead member for children's services, and the recession was really hurting, and several banks were going into liquidation. RBS was in desperate trouble, and the whole world felt like a bleak place. And the challenge I was given by those 2 very senior officials in the council was quite simple. We love what your service does, but in the future, you're going to have to deliver to the same standard and with the same level of impact for a lot less money. So go away and come back with some ideas. So that was an interesting challenge, and one that left me a little bit fearful. But we thought, well, we'll rise to that challenge, and I met with my project team, my management team, and we considered a whole range of different ideas about how we could make the service more viable financially, but maintain the level of support for young people that we've been used to offering. And we thought of many, many different things. But none of them were really adding up to something that was fully viable. But at the same time, there were some very interesting things we were hearing about going on in the NHS under the right to provide system, where bits of the NHS were beginning to depart from the NHS, set themselves up as independent, quite often community interest companies, in order to deliver services back to the NHS, but under contract. And it was a way also freeing themselves from the bureaucracy of the parent body, but also being able to deliver services in a more independent way. We went to see some of these interesting people, big and small, ranging from very small independent NHS providers to very, very large ones indeed. But there was a consistent theme in all of these visits. First of all, very interesting business model. I'd never heard of a community interest company before, CIC. And indeed, it's still, as a brand, as a model of social business, it's still not as well known as it should be. But in fact, there are more than 10,000 in the UK at this moment. And they combine the elements of the charitable objects with the business underpinning. So we were seeing a lot of these new CICs, very interesting models. They were trading openly in the market, bringing in new contracts and new forms of funding. We're seeing very interesting. But perhaps the most interesting thing of all was hearing what the staff were saying about how they perform their duties in this new model. And what they were talking about was being able to focus much more on patient care, being able to deliver the service how they'd been trained to deliver it, feeling more motivated, feeling more content about the job they were doing. And we kept hearing this phrase everywhere in these new NHS employee-led mutuals. We should have done this earlier, and we will never go back. I just thought it was an incredibly powerful message to hear from public servants, some of whom had worked for the NHS for decades, saying that they would never go back. Not in a totally malicious way, but it was just that they felt that their new way of working, their independence, their freedom from the quaint practices and bureaucracy of the NHS meant they could deliver a better service to patients. And that's what really attracted me and my colleagues to this way of working. And we had a stroke of luck as well. At the same time, we started to think in this direction. The Cabinet Office began the Public Sector Mutuals Programme. I think we've got some people from the Cabinet Office here. They're still here? Yes, welcome. And we joined their Public Sector Mutuals Programme. We got a lot of support through that programme. We got some financial support, and we got some business mentoring from GLL. June mentioned GLL. Mark Sesnan, the Chief Executive of GLL, joined us and became our business mentor. And he is a plain talking man. He described my first business plan, called it a business plan. It was nothing of the sort. But I thought it was good. Other people in the local authority thought it was really good, and they gave me lots of compliments. And I showed it to Mark, and he said I said, Mark, give me your honest-to-goodness feedback. I need to know exactly what you think. There's no point in soft-soaping. And so he said, Brendan, it's effing rubbish. I said, no, that's not what I really wanted to hear, actually. I prefer the soft soap, actually, than hear that. But what he was able to do, and what people in the space that Mark and June and others operate in, is to help to develop a social business with a commercial underpinning. How are you going to deliver your social objects unless you're bringing in the money? And that taught me an interesting lesson. So 2014, the 1st of January, we left the comfort of RBKC, which is a very good authority to work for. But with their cooperation and in partnership with the borough, we formed Epic CIC to deliver youth support services back into the community. And rather like our NHS colleagues, but also in the same spirit, we now say we should have done this earlier and we will never go back, because we've seen a different way of delivering public services. We've seen a way that combines the best elements of the social value of the public sector and the commercial underpinning to make things pay for themselves, and understanding the true meaning of cost and longevity and cash flow and profit and loss and so on, that drives these things forward. So it's been a very interesting time for us, and as I say, we've not regretted it one moment. Well, the odd moment, but not too much. So we were very reliant on central government funding. Not a good place to be where we were back in 2011. So part of the imperative was the financial situation. And of course, we did a lot of work with our staff around understanding the financial cliff edge that we were facing. But it's not just the graphs of doom and the financial Armageddon that drives staff towards something like this. You've got to be able to paint to your colleagues a compelling vision of what the future might look like and how the future might be different if you're going to drive staff towards something like this, because there has to be the staff engagement. And if you haven't got that, then you have staff who are only driven into your arms of the CIC model by fear rather than commitment. And so we did an awful lot of work in the build-up to creating Epic CIC on the staff engagement side of things. But we had a bit of a dilemma, really, because we were painting this compelling vision of the future for youth services, but nobody had done it before. We were the first, and at that time only. And, of course, the question that kept arising was, anybody else doing this, Brendan? And, of course, the answer was, there's interest, but there's nobody progressing at the rate that we are. So it was something of an abstract, compelling vision that we were having to project. But we did draw on the experience of NHS colleagues and a few others as well to come and speak to our staff, GLL included, about how different it can be and how it can feel, that it can be a lot scarier, but it can be a lot more nerve-wracking because you haven't got that comfort blanket of the local authority, if such a thing exists anymore. But you do have that excitement and that motivation of being in charge of your own destiny. And so that came across very strongly to our staff. So we decided to go alone, and off we are with a proper business plan. And it's based on developing the organisation from a value base, but also being commercial as well. Oh my goodness, I think the GCHQ graphics gremlin has entered into, because that looks like what we want to create is a car crash, isn't it, Dad? What that's supposed to be is a kind of a triangle of things, and in one segment, but if you think your Trivial Pursuit, one segment is public sector ethos, and the second segment is different business model, CIC, driven by growth and commercial underpinning. And the third thing is staff culture change and innovation. And that's what I'm just going to talk about in the remainder of the short time I have with you, because the other bits are quite easy to do. Actually, they're not. They're bloody hard, but they're easier because the business model, you get the lawyers doing all that for you. The commercial underpinning, you get good people coming to help you with that, people like Andrew and Mutual Ventures, organisations like MetaValue, and there are a lot of intermediaries around who help you and support you in developing your business processes. But it's the shift in the staff culture that is the real challenge. And in the public sector, this is my appalling caricature. But actually, it's not just the public sector. Quite a lot of our people think like this: half glass half full, awesome, glass half empty. But in the public sector, I think we've got a preponderance of people who think like this. We have staff and have had staff. They can't see the glass. It's not full or empty. There is no bloody glass as far as they're concerned. So you're having to deal with some of these really challenging cultural issues within a public sector context. And it's often because people have become too tired and too comfortable in the situation that they're in, and their motivation is low. And that's about the system, that's about the process. It's actually about the culture of the organisation itself, because I often feel in the public sector what we're very good at is identifying staff who we can recruit, who will be good at their jobs, and then bring them in to their position and making it as difficult as possible for them to do a good job. That seems to be a classic public sector thing. So we can have all the great business strategies in the world, great business models, growth plans, and so on, but it's actually the culture. And I think I'm the second one to quote Peter Drucker. Culture, it's attributed to him. I think several people are alleged to have said this: culture eats strategy for breakfast. I always knew that, but I now know it more than ever in the way that we're working. So we through our development, we met up with Henry. Henry was part of a training program that Andrew at Mutual Ventures organised for us, and we just thought, Happy Manifesto, when I read it, I thought every organisation, public, private, everyone should be run like this. Henry and I had a quick conversation before the conference started. You may have heard the announcement by David Cameron and Michael Gove that prisons are going to be devolved from government, and governors will have much more say over their running, and they'll compete for contracts, and they'll have much more influence over who works within the prisons. I think it's a really, really good idea. So we're going to go on creating a happy prison campaign, Henry. That's our next business challenge. So we met Henry and we just thought, this is it. This is the cultural lever. How are we going to... You can talk about culture change till the cows come home, but how are you going to do it? What are the physical manifestations of that culture shift that we're trying to achieve, that we're going to see? And I also read a book at that time. Everybody's recommending books today. I'll recommend you one. It's by Harvard professor called Dan Pink. Some of you may be familiar with Dan Pink and his work. And I know... Dom, you mentioned earlier, there's a load of crap gets uploaded to YouTube. But actually not Dan Pink. Go on YouTube, Dan Pink. He's got some really, really good videos on there. It's not part of the 300 hours of crap. It's actually, I think it's the 1 second of good stuff that's on there. He's written a book, Dan Pink, called Drive, The Surprising Truth About What Motivates People in the Workplace. Something very similar to that, Dan Pink Drive. And what he talks about is giving staff at work autonomy, freedom, and purpose is what drives people in the workplace. You've got to get the pay right. It's got to be fair. It's got to be equitable. But autonomy, freedom, and purpose. Autonomy to do their job without overbearing management. The freedom to solve problems and deliver the service or the job as they see fit. And the purpose. Why are they doing it? What is the reason why they're doing this? And I think in the public sector, we're pretty good on the purpose side of things, but not on the autonomy and freedom. And certainly that's the message that's written into... Oh, by the way, the surprising truth that Pink talks about is it's not money that motivates people. I thought, thank goodness for that, because we haven't got any. Otherwise, if he said it's all money, we'd be saying, and I wouldn't be recommending his book. But in fact, what Pink shows is a lot of evidence to show that money actually produces poorer performance. Get the pay scales right and fair, bonus schemes, performance-related pay, all of these things can actually create perverse behaviours and poorer performance. So one of the things that my managers were absolutely delighted I did when we read Dan Pink was to do away with our PRP scheme. So that went down well, didn't it, Mary? Yeah. But it doesn't work. You know, you're paying people bonuses because they've done a good job, and almost all of those, I would say 99%, are going to do that good job anyway because that's what they're motivated to do. You're just giving them free money. So PRP schemes never work. There's no evidence to show they work, and my advice, scrap them. So borrowing from Henry's book, we started to bring in some of those physical, because you can talk culture shift. It's very easy to talk about. Actually doing it is very complicated. So we had to do some real things. And one of the things that we've brought in from reading the Happy Manifesto and working with Henry, Kathy, and colleagues at the Happy Limited Company is recruiting for attitude. Now, in the past, we would recruit for CV. That was the local authority way of doing things. You had to tick every box on the CV before you get through to the next stage or an interview. And if anybody didn't tick all of the boxes, all of the qualifications, at least 3 years experience, degrees that we just slung into the JD without actually thinking, is that necessary? It was just an automatic thing, and we were following processes that the council had predetermined. And looking back on it, I just wonder how much talent we screened out at that stage, and I suspect an awful lot. Now we focus much more on the attitudes that people are presenting, both in their CVs and the way they present, in their interviews. Don't agree with June completely about interviews, but we don't just interview. People have to do practical processes and to demonstrate that they can do the job. And we bring them in on a probationary period because if we've made a mistake or they've made a mistake, because they could decide, I've joined the wrong organisation, we can have an amicable separation if it's not right for either party. So recruiting for attitude has meant we've brought some people into the organisation who've been absolute diamonds for us and have performed extraordinarily well, even though they haven't got every bit of the jigsaw at the point when they joined us. What they have got is dynamism, enthusiasm, and motivation. And they're a joy to work with. I mean, I really like working with people like that who are keen to learn, even if you've got to spend a bit more time with them in the first instance. But they want to learn, and they are highly motivated. And I can't bear negative people. I just cannot be around them. And people who are good and are highly qualified but are negative, I just try to avoid them. Anyway, that's a little secret I'm sharing with you about my own personal view. But it's recruiting for attitude has changed. But what attitudes are we looking for? Well, we decided not to just predetermine those attitudes in the management team. We got our own staff to decide what attitudes and what motivations are we looking for. We got them together in a conference and we asked them 2 questions. What do you expect of yourself when you come into work? And what do you expect of your colleagues? And that's generated a fascinating, heated, huge, argumentative cacophony of input from colleagues as they got to grips with the idea. And they came up with about 48 different things, and we had to narrow it down to around about 7, 8? 8 it was, wasn't it? 8. Attributes and motivations that they determined, the staff, that they want to see in all colleagues, both coming into the organisation and those present in the organisation. And it was a revelation. And we now use that for our performance appraisal system and our performance. And because the staff had designed it, there's much more buy-in. But we could never have done that in a local authority. The idea that a section of a local authority can design its own performance system using its staff, well, forget it. It's just not going to happen. In fact, I have to say this quietly because they might be able to hear me. The HR team in Kensington and Chelsea, HR team in Kensington and Chelsea, shut that door. Don't, it's okay. It's brought in consultants at great expense to design this competence-based performance appraisal system. It cost a fortune to design, to build, to produce these glossy manuals, to train the entire management team. And what was the net result of that? Everybody hated it. And every year, around about this time of year, you would get an email from the HR department saying, now is the time for it's called the real framework performance appraisal. The collective groan around the authority could be heard. It's on the Richter scale. It was so unpopular. And so all that expense to produce something that produced no result other than unhappiness. It was crazy. So getting the staff to design their own system gets the buy-in. And guess what? It costs you nothing. It is just a better way of doing things. So recruiting for attitude. What else we're doing? Pre-approval. This is a big feature in the Happy Manifesto. And we really buy into this notion that you will give a team of staff pre-approval on a particularly important piece of work, that you will say to that group of staff, we would like you, the organisation needs X, and you are going to design X or build X or create X, and whatever you come up with, we're going with. Now, I've always done the first 2 bits in the local authority, many times. Let's get a project team together. You come up with something, but the bit about whatever you come up with, we're going with, I could never say because I would not be allowed to give that level of permission. Simply not possible. You have to have at least 18 layers of permission to go through in a local authority before something becomes, and then the blame gets dissipated if it goes wrong. It's an institutional defense mechanism. So these are just some of the things that we put on our pre-approval list. The very first thing, in fact, I think we used in the pre-approval, we had a group of staff and young people with pre-approval to name the new organisation. And it was, whatever you come up with, we're going with. And I got a very, very early test of my belief in the pre-approval system because they came up with a name I didn't like, Epic CIC. And I don't know, what do I do now? I've given this statement, this commitment to pre-approval. I'm now faced with my first challenge at the first hurdle. But they went through a process of explaining how they'd arrived at that name. They had done something incredible. They got in touch with an organisation called the Museum of Brands, which, believe it or not, there is such a thing. And, of course, where else would it be but Kensington and Chelsea? It had to be, didn't it? And they happened to have a CSR element to the Museum of Brands. So they got in touch and managed to get a branding expert, a design expert who worked with us for nothing, honoured the CSR principles to help produce the logos and all the nice lettering and colouring and so on. You wouldn't believe how much work went into all of this stuff. But anyway, it's a good example. Why am I giving you that example? It shows that when you give a group of staff a key responsibility that they know will have a legacy within an organisation that's going to have a real impact and make a difference, they do a bloody good job. They research it really well. They take it incredibly seriously. And they do it to a level and a standard that you might not do if they thought, well, we'll just chuck something out there because it's got to go through the 18 layers. And when it comes out at the 19th juncture, it will look so different from what we did in the first place. It won't be ours. When they know it's going to be that they are going to have something that has a real and lasting legacy in the organisation, they do it really well. It's giving that autonomy and freedom to staff, but also responsibility. And staff take that responsibility very seriously. So our logo, our constitution was written by staff, our constitution that determines how we operate as an employee-led organisation, written by a group of staff, and our appraisal system I mentioned earlier. So these are the principles and processes that we're bringing in to change the culture of the organisation. Because, as I say, you can talk about it till the cows come home, but you've got to actually make some physical manifestations so staff recognise that it's happening. Now, I mentioned the staff council that we brought in earlier. You can get some barometers of change by some of these new institutions. The staff council, where I get grilled every month and asked all sorts of awkward questions. When I first started this, when I opened this up to staff and groups of staff would come together, it was a real whinge fest. Moan. It was very depressing. And I still thought, no, I'm going to stick with it. You know, I could close this down or treat it with disdain, but I'm going to stick with it. And now, 2 years in, we still get a little bit of whinging. Come on, you know, every organisation does. But the questions, the quality and the tone of the questions, you can almost track a change going in a curve. And it's now much more about how are we going to make this organisation better? Or we're not happy with X, we're not happy with Y. We think we should be doing A and B. So the quality and the tone and the nature of the question, they're still challenging. They still make me work hard, which I don't mind at all. But it's much more focused on how are we going to create a better organisation. So are we there yet? No, we're not. It's a journey. We still have a lot of work to do. We still have some staff who can't find the glass. I think we've got more staff now, it's half full rather than half empty. And good luck to them, and I'm really pleased about that. So I think the public sector has got an enormous amount of talent and creativity. I just love that picture. I just want all my staff to be saxophone-playing hamsters. That's my ambition. There is huge talent and creativity there. And we get a bad press, don't we? You know, I was thinking back to the time of the crash, and there was an awful lot in the paper about the pampered public sector and the private sector is bearing the brunt. You've still got your fancy pensions and you're overpaid and underperforming and lack productivity. And there was an awful lot going on at that time. And it just felt a bad place to be in the public sector. But I think things are shifting. And I was reminded of that reading an article in the Evening Standard last night that, and I'm going to say I am glad to hear this because I am almost from a value perspective. Independent schools in London are going out of business. And I don't care. And the reason I don't care is because the state sector is now outstripping the independent sector in London in terms of quality and results. That is a public sector success story of a monumental level that required public servants at many different levels, from government through the civil service, through Ofsted, through to course to teachers and schools themselves. And I'm thinking that this has taken place over a very short period of time. Not that very long ago, when my own son was going through secondary transfer, the bar we set for which school he was going to go to in London was one that he wouldn't come home from having been beaten up by the other kids. Now we are outstripping the private and independent sector, who are going out of business because they can't compete with the public sector. And that's where I think is an example of that talent and creativity and commitment to doing social good that is the best of the public sector. So Epic CIC, it's exciting, it's invigorating, it's crazy, it's mad. And like June, there are days when it's reaching for the glass of wine just to keep you going. I could have stayed in the public sector and hung on to a management job that would have bored me rigid but kept my pension, and I would have retired thinking, I'm so glad I did that, because I can go into life, my retirement years, telling my grandchildren that I spent my life being an okay civil servant. What a really interesting story that might be. Well, I thought, well, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do something very different. And I know others, Deanne and others, have done the same thing, come out of the public sector to do something far more exciting, deliver better services, motivating staff, doing it with a commercial underpinning. And actually, at the end of the day, it's the service user that's getting the better deal.